I have a story, and you have a story. And stories are meant to be told. That's why I'm beginning today and going through the end of March, we're beginning a brand new series called Let Me Tell You. And our aim of the series is pretty simple. We want to use these 4 weeks to both inspire and equip you to be able to tell your faith story. And if you'll engage both on Sundays for these 4 weeks, as well as everything that we're doing midweek and in the Share Your Story Challenge, I promise you this, you will see your courage and your confidence rise as we all learn how to more effectively share our story. See, I know that God is writing something significant in your own story, and what I want you to know is simply this. Whatever God's writing in your story, it's never solely for your benefit. He wants to use your story to write, or should I say, to rewrite the stories of the people that He has placed around you and the people that He's placed around me. When God is writing our story, the story never ends with us. When God is writing our story, the story never ends. Just keep this in mind. This is true all throughout the Bible. Whatever God's doing in my life, it never ends with me. Whatever God's doing in your life, it never ends with you. All the way back to Genesis chapter 12, when you understand God saying to Abraham, I am blessing you, but the blessing will never end with you. I am blessing you so that you might be a blessing. God is writing or rewriting your story so that He might use your story to help rewrite the stories of others. Today, we're going to look at a historic encounter that Jesus had with a Samaritan woman. But before we get to that historic encounter, I just want you to be thinking, what is God doing in your life? Because when Jesus shows up to rewrite her story, He absolutely wanted to change her story, but He didn't want to stop there. He wanted to change her story so that she might go back to a town that didn't have a whole lot of positive things to say about her, at least yet. So she would go back and help tell their story and rewrite some of their story. Before we get into the text in John chapter 4, I just want you to ask this question. What is God wanting me to do with my story? What is God wanting me to do with my story? You're asking, of course, what is God wanting you to do with your story? Because God never write stories in our lives so that we're the only ones who will know about them. God is wanting to use your story and my story and our story to help write more stories. John chapter 4, if you want to go ahead and find your place there, I'll give you some context. As we open up this chapter, what you see is that Jesus has left Judea and He is headed back to Galilee. And the text says that He's got to go through Samaria. And as He's going through Samaria, He comes to a town called Sychar, and it's about 12 o'clock, and He is tired from His journey, so He has a seat at what is known as Jacob's Well. His disciples who've been traveling with Him, they head into town to buy food, and so Jesus is alone right there by Jacob's Well, hottest part of the day. He is exhausted from his trip so far, and at that time, a Samaritan woman comes up, and she says, she doesn't say anything to Jesus. Jesus says to her, will you give me a drink of water? And she says to him, how can you ask me for a drink? You're a Jewish man, I'm a Samaritan woman. What are you doing asking me for a drink? And in John chapter 4, verse 10, and listen to what happens. Jesus answered her, listen, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked Him, and He would have given you living water. I don't know what you're looking for today, but I want you to think about the words that Jesus gave to this woman. If you only knew the gift of God and who it is that is approaching you in this encounter, here's what you would do. You would have asked Him, if you knew who He was, you would have asked Him, and He would have given you living water. Let me say it this way. Everyone you and I know is looking for living water, no matter what they call it. Every person that you work with, they're looking for living water, no matter what they call it. Every child in your home is looking for living water, no matter their age, Every person in your neighborhood, everyone in your extended family, everyone that you love to spend time with and that you try to avoid, every human being is looking for living water, no matter what they call it. They may call it meaning or significance or identity or purpose or joy or hope or peace or happiness or ecstasy or euphoria. They may call it a million other things, but everyone is searching for living water. And the question, of course, is where are people searching for this living water? Where are people searching for this living water? The answer is everywhere. Everywhere. Open up the news. They're searching everywhere. Walk down any neighborhood in San Francisco. They're searching everywhere. Get onto your social media. Okay, not right now. Listen to this message. But everyone is looking everywhere to find living water. Let me tell you some of the places people are looking for this living water. They're looking for it in accomplishment and in wealth and in status and in their identity and in relationships and in sexual encounters and in church leadership. You're like, did he really just say sexual encounters and church leaderships? Yes, because we're all looking for something that will quench us once and for all. Some people are living vicariously through their children. Other people are living based on the approval of everyone else around them. People are looking for this living water all over, and if you have found the living water, you need to let people know that their search can end. The famous song by the iconic rock band U2, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Their frontman Bono says about that song that it is a gospel song with a restless spirit. It's a gospel song with a restless spirit. And I'm reminded of St. Augustine in his book Confessions when he said this: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." You've made us. God has made us for himself. And until we find that home, until we find that dwelling place in Jesus, until we realize that what our hearts have been aching for since before we were born is actually found in God, we will be restless, and we will look here and we will look there and we will look everywhere. In John 4:13 through 15, Jesus says to this woman, "Everyone who drinks this water, though actual well water, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." So Jesus is saying, if you understand what's happening, everyone's looking outside of themselves for something that will satisfy. And Jesus is saying, if you come to me, I'll give you the kind of living water that will spring up from within you, and you won't have to look to romance or sex or career or promotion or having successful children or pleasure or a million other things. It will actually come from inside you. And then verse 15, the woman said what everyone should say when they hear an offer like he's just made. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." She's like, give me this so that I won't have to keep coming back here. Now, Jesus is using metaphor. Jesus is using imagery, but the woman shows up every day to get actual water, but Jesus is doing something brilliant. If you don't understand how masterful a communicator Jesus is, just think about what he's doing. He knows that this woman is showing up day after day to get something that she actually does need, physical water, and she will need to continue to show up even after she meets Jesus to get this physical water. She's asking the question, where do I get this water? Let me tell you what Jesus does. Jesus says, hey, why don't you go call your husband and then come back? The woman says to him, I actually don't have a husband. To which Jesus replies, that's the truth. You do not have a husband today. You have had five husbands, and you're now living with a man who actually isn't your husband. And she's like, whoa. I think he's doing it in a loving way, but Jesus is exposing what she's looked to for her own living water. And before we get to the part about the encounter and what she does after their encounter, and she goes to tell her story, and I'm going to start encouraging us to share our story, I just want to ask you this. Do you have a story? Have you still not found what you're looking for? Maybe today would be the day for you. So when we're encouraging everyone else to share their story, we're just encouraging you to step into your story today. So Jesus is like, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands. You're now living with a man who's not your husband. And she's like, well, I guess you're a prophet, right? I mean, you've got to be a prophet. You know so much about me. She says this, I see that you're a prophet. We know that Messiah is coming, and when the Messiah comes, he's going to explain everything to us. Here's the mic drop moment. Jesus says to her, I am he. I am the Messiah. Now, what does she do with this encounter with Jesus? Like, her story's starting to change. What does she do? This woman at the well, she does what everyone does with a great story. She goes to tell the story. And I want you to see her telling of the story in verses 28 through 30 and 39 through 42. Here's what the woman does. Listen what she first does. Then, leaving her water jar, leaving the one thing she came to fill up, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. So then his disciples come back, and that's a really important part, but just not our purpose for tonight. Go to verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him. Listen, why? Because of the woman's testimony, because she told her story. He told me, she said to them, everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. I love this story. When I told my wife I was teaching on this text, she's like, again? I'm like, oh, there's so much to unearth from this text. Yes, I'll do it again and again and again and again. But for our purposes today, I want to give you 3 big ideas from her telling her story that I believe are going to resonate and free us to tell our story. Here's the first big idea. You don't have to have a clean past to tell your story. You don't have to have a clean past to tell your story. When Jesus encounters this woman, he encounters her at noon. What is she doing at the well during the hottest part of the day? Why doesn't she come early in the morning when all of the other women show up to get their water for the day? The reason she's showing up at noon is because she's tired of the shame. She's tired of the ridicule. She's tired of them pointing at her and laughing. She's done with that. So if that's why she came at noon, you tell me, why in the world is she now running to tell those people, so much so that she leaves her water jar behind? Why is she in such a rush to tell her story? What must have happened in that moment with Jesus that would change everything she thinks about who she should be around and who she shouldn't be around? She goes to her town and she says to them, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Now, does that sound like good news to anybody else with a past? Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. And if you look at the story, the reason she shows up at noon is because everybody already kind of knows what she's done. Why would it be good news for her to say to the town, hey guys, I've been avoiding you. That's why I don't show up in the mornings. But I need you to come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Why would this be good news? Let me tell you the only reason, the only explanation. It must have been good news that Jesus told her everything she ever did because he said it with such compassion and such a lack of condemnation. And let me tell you what God's been stirring in my heart, church. I don't know when we're going to preach it. I don't know how it's going to come out. But I'm just telling you, God is impressing something on my heart that I'm going to have to start teaching us along the way because I'm learning it and I'm going to teach it to you and we're going to lean into it as a staff team and we're going to bring it to the congregation. Here's the 3 words I want to give you that we must have present: conviction and compassion. And the big word out of those 3 isn't conviction and it isn't compassion. It is and, because too many people in our lives today and too many churches and too many Christians today are choosing, I want conviction or I want compassion. One side is all conviction, right? They're like, this is the truth. Here's the doctrine. This is right. This is wrong. But they are not compassionate in the least. The other side is like, we're going to be so compassionate. We're just going to sweep sin under the rug. And I'm here to tell you that that isn't the way of Jesus. We must have conviction and we must have compassion. Jesus did not sweep her sin under the rug. He exposed her sin where she was looking for living water so that she might press in further and take up his offer that he's inviting her to step into. Will we be people of conviction and compassion? You don't have to have a clean past to tell your story. She told her story to the very people who knew about her unclean past. Now, I don't know everything about you. But I know one way that you're just like me and that you're just like this woman. You don't have a perfect past. But that doesn't disqualify you from telling your story. My guess is it will make your story more powerful when you say, I used to be like this, but God changed me, now I'm like that. So the first one is this: you don't have to have a clean past to tell your story. Number two, you don't have to know all of the answers to tell your story. Look at the end of verse 29. This woman's like, could this be the Messiah? I don't know. So many of us today feel this pressure to live with such certainty. But even as the Samaritan woman is beginning her faith journey with Jesus, she's still filled with doubt. She's like, come see a man, he might be the Messiah. You don't have to know all of the answers to tell your story. Now, let me be clear. You and I should spend every day getting to know Jesus better than we knew him the day before. Okay? Why, Ben? If we don't have to know all the answers to tell our stories, why should we get to know Jesus better and better every day? Because he is glorious, because he is beautiful, because he is what and who your heart is aching for, because he knows you inside and out and he still loves you, because he's compassionate toward you, because his grace is abundant and his mercy is there and his love is steadfast. So this is not an excuse. This point, you don't have to know all the answers to tell your story, not an excuse for you and I not to get to know Jesus better every day. But I get it, right? When we go to tell our stories, anybody besides the pastor feel a little pressure to have all the right answers? And you're like, what if they ask me this question? They probably will ask you this question. You're like, Ben, there's a lot of pressure with trying to have all of the right answers. I get it. Just imagine for a moment that you're the lead pastor of Epic Church and people assume that you get paid to be the answer guy. I'm like, oh God, can I say I don't know? I'll give you a couple lines, okay? Here's the first one. I don't know, but I'll try to find out. Try to find out. But seriously, we need to get comfortable saying, I don't know. Now here, let me give you the pattern for how we do this. Okay? Here it is. Ready? Somebody asks that question, you're like, I really don't know. Here's how you respond. So they're like, here's the question, and here's what you say. I don't know about that, but I do know about this. And you tell them what you do know. You do know that you were lost and now you're found. You do know that you were riddled with anxiety, now you're filled with peace. You do know that fear paralyzed you and now you're filled with faith. You don't know about that, but you know about this. Just tell what you know. In John chapter 9, there's a man who's been born blind. It's one of my favorite stories for lots of reasons. He's been born blind. Jesus shows up. Jesus, he does his interesting thing where he spits on the ground, makes some saliva, puts it on the man's eyes, and tells the man, go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man goes and washes in the pool of Siloam, and then he's able to see. Now, everyone you would think would throw a party, but remember, Pharisees love to squash a good party. You have anybody like that in your life? Anybody who's a little too strict with COVID? No, I'm just kidding. But anybody where you're like trying to party and they're like, no, we cannot party. The Pharisees are like this. So when they discovered the healing took place on the Sabbath, they were like, well, the person who healed you must have been a sinner. Anybody have those people in your life? Look at John 9:25 on the screen. What did the man say? The man replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. I don't know everything about him, but I can tell you he has changed my life. I don't know. Let me tell you one thing I do know. There's still a lot of things, even as a pastor doing ministry now 20 plus years, that I don't know. But here's what I do know. I was an angry young man, and God softened my heart. I know that. Here's what I do know. I had things that I was addicted to, and God freed me from that. I don't know everything about end times, but I know that I'm free. What do you know? I'll give you this principle on the screen. You don't have to know everything about Jesus in order to share what you do know about Jesus. Some of us are like, until I know everything, I won't share anything. And God's like, please share what we've done for you so far. Just start sharing what we've done. I don't know about this, but I do know about that. So the first two of the three I've given you are these. You don't have to have a clean past to tell your story. You don't have to know all the answers to tell your story. And here's number 3. You have a story to tell, but you aren't responsible for the outcome. 2 primary reasons you and I do not share our stories of faith more often: fear of rejection and a fear of failure. We fear rejection because if it doesn't go well, we're going to let the person we shared our story with down. We're going to let them down. We fear failure because if we don't see a response from them, we're going to feel like we let God down. That's a pretty precarious spot to be in, isn't it? Like, oh, if they reject me, they're not going to be happy with me. And if they reject this, God's not going to be happy with me. I just won't tell my story. At Epic, we talk all of the time about what is God's part and what is our part. Here's your part. Listen clearly. Tell your story. Pray for God to open hearts. But here's what your part is not. Your part is not opening the heart of a human being. His part. Your part is not the response of your friend or colleague or parent or child or small group member here at Epic. Your part is not their response. That's their part. It is actually up to them. You share what you know about Jesus to be true. Their part is to reject or to receive. I love what it says in the text. It said that the woman went and told her story, and when she told her story, people jumped in with Jesus. I love that. But that wasn't enough for everyone. And so other people said, we needed to hear from Jesus. And so they said this, I love this. We believe not just because of your story. Don't you love that? They're not discounting her story. They're not dismissing her story. They're just like, hey, your story made us curious. Your story got us interested. Your story made us think, what if? But the pressure wasn't on her shoulders. If anybody had the pressure, it was whether or not Jesus truly is the Messiah. And he's still wearing that pressure pretty well today, by the way. You're not responsible for the outcome. You tell your story. And here's the thing you've got to know. No one could tell the Samaritan woman's story like the Samaritan woman. No one can tell my story like I can tell my story. And no one can tell your story like you can tell your story. My story, and I'll unpack it over the weeks if you haven't heard it over the years, but my story is in so many ways like the Samaritan woman, this quest to find the living water. As a boy, I can remember wanting to be seen as special, and so I tried to show out initially in academics. I'll never forget when I had the same first grade teacher that my brother Lee had, and she told me that I was a better reader than my older brother. I'm like, I'm in. I'll never forget in high school seeing that in crowd, just telling myself if I could get in with them, I would be in. And guess what? I got in. And I was miserable. I faked it like everything was awesome by being with that group, but I was miserable. You get to college, and now it's about romantic relationships, and that I just know I just need the right woman, and then everything that I've been longing for my entire life, I'll be satisfied. Then you go into church leadership, and you're like, I'm working for God now. This is going to fulfill me completely, and none of those things work. The reality is this. Whether you have a romantic relationship or not, whether you ever do another thing or I ever do another thing for God, whether anyone ever thinks we're special, and whether we're in with the right group, whether that's at work or in your neighborhood or in your industry, if none of those things ever happen, but you find what you're searching for in Jesus, you're going to be better than people who have all of those things and more. And I love what we're doing in this series. We're going to kind of build up to really sharing our story. And if you didn't hear this earlier, I want to invite you to join me on the Share My Story Challenge. Share My Story Challenge. Here's what we're going to do. Over these weeks of March, we're going to just equip and inspire you and help you along the way so that we, as a community, do this together and share our stories leading up to Easter. And so what I need you to do is get your phone out, and I want you to text my story to 313131. go ahead and do that, even if you're not sure you're going to follow through with it, right? Go ahead and do it. If we don't start here, we won't get there. Go ahead and sign up for that. And what's going to happen is all along the way, we're going to equip you to share your story. In fact, here's what's going to happen week 1. You're going to get a text back and prompts and all that. But week 1, we're just going to take time this week to reflect on and write down our faith story. So questions like, hey, what was your life like before you started following Jesus? How did you come to follow Jesus? What has been your experience now that you are a follower of Jesus? And perhaps you would even add, here's how Epic Church has helped me to grow in my faith in Jesus. And we're just going to build up over the month. This is something you can do. In fact, if I'm honest with you, you're the only person that can do that. You know how sometimes at church we expect a certain percentage of the church to do all of the work? Do you know what none of us can do? Tell your story. It's your story. We can't tell it with the passion. We can't tell it with the power. We can't share it with the emotion. Only you can do that. And you don't need to compare your story to my story or someone else's story. It's your story for a reason. So start this week just writing down your story. I hope a whole bunch of us engage in this challenge because I believe God's going to build our courage and our confidence throughout this month. And it's going to bear fruit as we head towards Easter, a day that more people, more than any other day, will actually show up to Epic online and attend our Easter gatherings. Now, to close, let me just say, I know some of you don't have a faith story yet. Your heart is still restless. You are still a wanderer. You are still searching for it. Some of you have made millions of dollars and yet you haven't found it. Some of you have had many men and many women and you haven't found it. Some of you have been recognized as one of the smartest or one of the most accomplished people in your profession or even in our area and it still hasn't done it. What I want to invite you to do is what Jesus invited the Samaritan woman to do. Come and taste this living water. Stop having to go back to this well and the other well over there. Jesus has what you long for. And on our brand new website, we've set up some great resources. I want to give you one of those so you can get just video from me about what it means to be a Christian, what baptism looks like, how spiritual growth works in your life. So if you want to give your life to Jesus or just understand how you can become a person of faith as well as grow in that faith, I want you to go to epicsf.com/next-steps. epicsf.com/next-steps. Video from me about if you're new to faith. Guys, there's nothing like finding what you've been looking for your entire life. And I just invite you in the same way Jesus invited this woman. If you knew the gift of God, if you just knew it, you would ask him for a drink and he would give you. He wouldn't play hide and seek from you. He wouldn't tell you to perform your way into this love and grace. If you knew it, you would ask him, and he would in turn give you living water. I want to pray for 2 things as I end this teaching. Number 1, that you and I would find in Jesus everything we've been searching for. And number 2, that we would be willing to tell the world, at least our world, what we have found there. Let me pray for you. Jesus, thank you that when I was searching, when I was on a quest to discover what could do it for me, you showed up. Thank you for the men and women, both in my home and in my church and elsewhere, who told their story so that I could begin to imagine what my story could look like if I were to have an encounter with you. God, you've given us stories, and for those that still need one, God, would you drop that story into their heart today? That there's a God who loves them, a God who created them, a God who sent his own son, who lived a perfect life and died this terrible death on the cross so that they might be brought into a relationship with God and become a son or become a daughter to God. And then God, for the rest of us now, would you help us to tell our story? No one can tell the story like we can about what you've done in our lives. God, build this individually throughout this church and build it collectively, God. Let's have this imagination that what God could do if we would just tell the story. We don't have a clean past. We don't have all the answers. We aren't responsible for the outcomes, but we do have a story to tell. God, pour your Spirit on us as we tell your story that matches our story. In Jesus' name, amen.